Hi Year 11. This video is designed to help you get a grade that you're proud of when it comes to the pest control internal. So it's how to get the A, how to get the M, how to get the E. Okay, now I'd advise that you go and you look at previous videos in relation to specific concepts. That will help you, it will give you a level of depth and understanding in relation to some of the key ideas that relate to the internal. But when we're talking about getting an achieved, your big idea here is being able to look at data, look at things like tracking indexes or the numbers of pests that we've got in a particular place, and look at the observations, look at the information in the area of where there is pest control and where there isn't pest control, and be able to describe what you're actually seeing, and then use that information to identify how that relates to environmental factors and link that how changes might affect that organism. So what do we mean by that when we talk about environmental factors? How does something like predation or competition or food availability affect things like species diversity or the numbers of species or the density of those species? And in broad and simple terms, where we have a lack of pest control, what we're going to have is greater predation or greater competition and lower food availability, and that will reduce species diversity and abundance and density. Okay, so it's linking those things to actual observations. It's not as simple as just describing it in the way that I have there. You've got to link that to your data. Okay, that's how you get your achieved. Now, let's give it a little bit more detail. So, for example, in a no pest control area, we're going to find ourselves with far more of those invasive species, things like rats and possums. And the data will show that to you. You need to then say how that would look. Where you don't have any pest control, that's going to result in less diversity, lower density of birds, a lower density of seedlings. So you need to make sure you're tagging the environmental factor, this pest control business, to the appropriate change on the other species. And again, link that to the data. The reason there's going to be less birds or less seedlings in the no pest control area, and this is your big idea, is because of there being more predation, more competition, less food availability. Okay, this is because things like predation means that you're going to have less bird seedlings available, less birds or less seedlings available because they're going to be outcompeted, they're not going to have as much food, or they're going to be eaten by that invasive pest. So it really is linking your data to the pest control or the lack of pest control. So that's the achieved. How do you get a merit? Well, merit is always explaining things in detail, in depth. So you've got your observation. You've made your link. You said this has happened. This lack of pest control has resulted in more competition. Okay, you need to be linking that, and this is the key idea: is the stuff that's underlined to the impact or on the organism or the implications for the ecosystem as a whole. It is not just this is bad for one species. Bigger picture, what's this going to do for other things in the environment? Why is a lack of tui, because they're being predated by various invasive species, bad bigger picture for more than just the tui? Okay, that implication for the wider ecosystem shows your understanding of the effect of pest control more deeply, and that's at the core of getting a merit. So what does that look like? Okay, so it's very similar for getting an achieved at a basic level, but you then, and I'd refer you to two things in the example that you've got in front of you. One will be that really good detailed bit of processing of data. So you'll notice is there's percentages here. So you're referring to named bits of data. So if you see in that pest control area, your tracking index is going to have a far lower value if the pest control has been effective than it would be in an area of non-pest control. So you can make real reference to your data, show that you understand it from there. Okay, you can then do that for things like your tracking indexes, for your species per quadrat, for your biodiversity of your different measures that you've got, your different sets of data. But then comes the second part, okay? The causal link, the linking it to other species. So fair enough, you might be talking about a increase in predation, and that leading to a reduction in a particular bird species. So, like more possums browsing around will mean there's less food for birds. The birds will have less energy to be able to survive and reproduce because they're being outcompeted by those possums. And if those bird species are going to decrease, then what's going to happen is there's going to be a decrease in the number of seedlings because they're not being able to, the seedlings being dispersed, and therefore a decrease in the number of mature seeds, because if seed dispersal doesn't happen, then plant reproduction will be limited, and that will lead to further decreases in things like biodiversity across the wider population. So it's a far more detailed explanation than simply saying this is bad for this species. This is bad for a whole bunch of reasons. And again, it's not simply as just as straightforward as saying this is bad. This will have a negative effect. This will have a negative effect because the implications of this negative effect are, okay, you are scaffolding your response and showing a detailed understanding. So if we've got the M, let's go for the E. To get an E, it's always what it is in biology, comprehensive explanations, taking your observations for things like that pest control versus non-pest control, making the causal links as you've just done at Merit, but discussing it for the organism and for the wider ecosystem as a whole. You need to really be able to elaborate and apply and justify. And that's one of the reasons why you always get that holistic excellence as a writing it well enough for it to sound like, for it to read like it's an excellence, where you've got those links right the way through your extended response, and you're really showing that really good understanding of the effects of pest control and its implications for individuals and for the wider ecosystem that that individual is a part of. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, similar to Merit, but cover the increase and decrease with named examples. So by that I mean, if you're going to talk about the effect on a tui, which is a pollinator, or a kereroo, which is a seed disperser, what's that going to do to a particular type of plant, and why is that going to happen? Okay, so the big idea here would be linking the unique adaptations of the kereroo that are going to make it a really good seed disperser for a pigeonwood. And if it's gone, then that seed dispersal won't happen, and therefore then you've got your additional links that are going to happen because the kereroo isn't doing that seed dispersal role. That keystone species isn't there, and there are implications for that. Second part of that, what's going to happen for that group of species all the way through the food web? So if this could include if we're going to have this decrease in the number of kereroos, wider implications across the food web. So you need to understand the other individual populations that are in that community of species in that particular ecosystem. Name the effects, explain them, and recognize why they are happening. If you've got that, then holistically done well, you're at an E. Okay. The relationship, if you're looking at the diagram around you, the relationship in the ecosystem is complicated. So when you're talking about the implications and effects, recognize that any one individual species is in a food web with all the others around it, and that the relationships are complex. It isn't simply a case of this is eaten by that. What is these species? Who's competing with who? Who has keystone species roles? Who are your seed dispersers? What are they seed dispersing? Who are your pollinators? What are they pollinating? What are the implications if the thing that is being pollinated is no longer there? And link those effects to the wider community and to the wider ecosystem. Okay. You've also got to be mindful as well of some of the mechanisms of pest control. So we'll talk about using bait stations, and in bait you'll have a chemical called brodifacoum. Brodifacoum is basically an anticoagulant. What that means is it stops blood from clotting. Now, if you are at the top of a food chain, you are more vulnerable to building up the anticoagulant in you. Okay, the consequence of that is that yes, you are reducing the number of mammal predators by putting this bait that is toxic to them. But if a moorpork or anything at the top end of a food chain is eating that toxin because it's eating things that have got that toxin in them, what will happen is the concentration of the toxin will accumulate. The fancy science word is bioaccumulation, and that will be dangerous and threatening to the moorpork. It can be affected by the same toxin. So that is a negative effect of pest control, and explained and justified well of that particular type of pest control that will help you in getting that higher grade. I've mentioned several times in this video and in previous videos this concept of a keystone species. So we're clear, recognizing what a keystone species is a big deal. Right? If you're aiming for a merit or an excellence, you've got to have a good understanding of this. So when we talk about a keystone species, we're describing an organism that's got a unique and crucial role in how the ecosystem functions. It is not as simple as this thing eats this thing. Things that are seed dispersers and pollinators are frequently keystone species. Okay, they will have a really large effect on the environment relative to their own abundance. Because if they're a seed disperser or a pollinator, in addition to whatever they're eating, they are going to be supporting producers, plants, specific plants in that ecosystem in surviving and thriving. And if you remove those plants, then you have a major problem because the entire ecosystem can border on basically collapsing. Right? And therefore, you lose that native biodiversity simply by losing a seed disperser or a pollinator or another keystone species with a keystone role. Okay, the phrase keystone comes from the notion of a bridge. And if you think about an old time bridge built in an arc made of stone, the most important stone is the one right in the middle. It's called the keystone. You remove it, the entire bridge falls down. The same as a keystone species in ecology. You remove it, it may not look that different to any other stone or any other species, but you remove it and you have grave implications for the stability of your ecosystem if it is not carrying out its unique and crucial role.